The hum of the floor polisher was a familiar lullaby, a mechanical heartbeat in the cavernous silence of the Vance Tower lobby. Marcus moved in long, practiced arcs, his reflection gliding across the black marble like a ghost. It was 10:47 p.m. The night crew was his world, a kingdom of shadows and echoes where he was the invisible king. He liked it that way. Invisibility was safety. It was a cloak he had learned to wear long before he ever picked up a mop. For a black man in America, especially a single father with everything to lose, being overlooked was a survival tactic. One wrong glance, one misunderstood gesture, one person's fear-laced assumption could unravel the life he had so carefully stitched together for himself and his daughter. He checked his watch again. 10:48 p.m. Zara's school play, A Journey Through the Stars, was tomorrow at 6 p.m. sharp. She was playing the North Star, a non-speaking role that she had nonetheless imbued with cosmic significance. For weeks she had practiced her one job, standing perfectly still on a painted yellow box and pointing. "I guide the lost sailors, Daddy," she'd explained with the solemnity of a high court judge, her big brown eyes wide. "It's the most important job because without me, everyone stays lost forever." He had promised her he would be in the front row. He always was. Since Angela died, his promises to Zara were the foundation of their world, the unshakable bedrock in a life that had already trembled too much. A faint chime announced the arrival of a private elevator, the one that went straight to the penthouse offices. The polished brass doors slid open, and a woman stumbled out. Marcus instinctively straightened up, pulling his cart slightly back into the shadows of a large potted ficus. It was her, Elizabeth Vance. The CEO, the name on the building. He'd only ever seen her in polished corporate photos, or from a great distance. A whirlwind of tailored suits and determined strides. Tonight, she was a different person. Her silk blouse was rumpled, a dark stain, wine maybe, blossoming near the collar. Her usually immaculate blonde hair was escaping its chignon in loose strands, and her eyes, when she briefly looked up, were glassy and unfocused. She took 2 wobbly steps and her ankle twisted in her high heel. She went down hard. Marcus's heart hammered against his ribs. The protocol was clear. Call security, report the incident, and stay back. Do not engage, especially not with her. But the lobby was deserted. The security guards, Old Manny and Young Pete, were likely on their rounds in the upper floors or grabbing a late coffee. He heard a soft, broken sound. A sob. She was trying to push herself up, her hands slipping on the slick marble. He saw not a CEO, but a woman in pain, a woman who was vulnerable and alone. He thought of Angela in her final weeks, the way she had fought for every ounce of dignity even when her body betrayed her. He stepped out from behind the ficus. His worn work boots made no sound. "Mom, are you all right?" Elizabeth Vance looked up, her face a mask of confusion and distress. The scent of expensive perfume and something sharper, like whiskey, hit him. I think I twisted my ankle." Her voice was thick, slurred. She tried to get up again and winced, sinking back to the floor. He saw the tears tracking through her makeup then, the raw despair in her eyes that had nothing to do with the physical pain. It was a deeper hurt. He recognized it. It was the look of someone whose world had just been pulled out from under them. Against every instinct screaming at him to walk away, to call security and disappear, he knelt down, keeping a respectful distance. "Let me help you." He had no idea that this one simple human act of kindness was a choice that would echo through the next 24 hours. Threatening to shatter his carefully constructed world, he helped her into a chair, retrieved a fallen purse, and found her phone. He tried to call a car for her, but she was too incoherent to give him an address, just mumbling about a betrayal, about papers being signed. He couldn't leave her like this. So he made another choice, a more dangerous one. He looked at her, then at the clock on the wall. He thought of Zara, practicing her North Star pose in the living room. He thought of his promise. Then he looked back at the broken woman in the chair. He called Mrs. Patterson, his elderly neighbor, the woman who was a second grandmother to Zara. "Mrs. P, it's Marcus. I'm so sorry to call this late. Something's happened at work. I'm going to be very late. I might not make it back tonight. Is everything all right, dear?" Her voice was warm, full of sleep and concern. "Yes, just a situation I have to handle. Please tell Zara I love her." He paused, the words catching in his throat. "And Mrs. P, about the play tomorrow. I don't know if I'm going to make it." Silence on the other end. He could feel her disappointment for him, for Zara. "Oh, Marcus, she's been so excited." I know. Can you please go for me and record it, please?" "Of course, dear. Don't you worry about a thing. You just handle what you need to handle." He hung up, a cold knot of dread and guilt tightening in his stomach. He had broken his first promise. He helped Elizabeth Vance to her feet, her arm draped over his shoulder, and guided her out of the glittering, empty lobby and into the anonymity of the New York night. He took her home. Not to her home, which was a mystery, but to his. A small 2-bedroom apartment in a modest Brooklyn walk-up. It was the only thing he could think to do. But the next morning, when Elizabeth Vance woke up in his daughter's unicorn-themed bedroom, wearing an old T-shirt of his late wife's because her own clothes had been soiled, one phone call could change everything. For a black man, a single father, there was no room for misunderstanding. It didn't matter what actually happened. The only thing that would matter was how it looked. And it looked very, very bad. The drive from Manhattan to his corner of Brooklyn had been a surreal journey through a city that was winding down for the night. Elizabeth Vance was mostly a dead weight against him in the back of the cab, her head lolling against the window. She murmured things, fragmented sentences about a man named Richard, about a 20-year partnership, about a junior associate. It was the classic, ugly story of corporate and personal betrayal, and Marcus felt a pang of sympathy that surprised him. In the Vance Tower, she was a titan, a force of nature. In the back of this yellow cab, she was just a woman whose heart had been shattered. Getting her up the 3 flights of stairs to his apartment was an ordeal. He was acutely aware of every creak of the old wooden steps, every curious glance from a neighbor's peephole. He felt like he was smuggling something illicit, his skin prickling with the familiar, low-grade anxiety of being watched and judged. He finally managed to get his door open and guided her inside. The apartment was small but immaculate. Zara's artwork was taped to the walls, vibrant, chaotic explosions of color. A picture of him and Angela, smiling on their wedding day, sat on the small mantelpiece. The space smelled of lemon cleaner and, faintly, of the lavender fabric softener Angela had always loved. He deposited Elizabeth gently onto the worn floral sofa. She was barely conscious now. He took off her ridiculously expensive, impractical shoes, placing them neatly by the door. Her ankle was already starting to swell. He went to the freezer and wrapped a bag of frozen peas in a dish towel, carefully propping her foot up on a pillow and placing the makeshift ice pack on it. He looked at her, passed out on his couch, a powerful CEO brought low. He felt a profound sense of unease. What had he gotten himself into? He couldn't just leave her there. What if she rolled off? What if she got sick? The only other bed was his, and that was a line he wouldn't even approach, let alone cross. That left Zara's room. His daughter was staying at Mrs. Patterson's tonight, a regular Friday night sleepover that suddenly felt like a blessing from the heavens. Her room was a sanctuary of innocence, covered in drawings of stars and planets, a testament to her current astronomical obsession. A small galaxy of glow-in-the-dark stars was stuck to the ceiling. It felt wrong to bring the mess of the adult world into this space, but he had no other choice. Her blouse was stained and damp. He couldn't let her sleep in that. He went to his own room and opened the bottom drawer of his dresser. Angela's things. He hadn't been able to part with them yet. He pulled out a soft, worn cotton t-shirt, one she used to sleep in. It smelled faintly of her, of a life that was gone. A wave of grief, sharp and sudden, washed over him. He held the shirt for a moment, his eyes stinging. He was using his dead wife's shirt for a stranger. It felt like a betrayal of a different kind. But what else could he do? He found a pair of his own clean sweatpants, ones with a drawstring waist. With the utmost care, as if he were handling a delicate, sleeping bird, he managed to get her out of the damp blouse and into the t-shirt. He left her skirt on, simply pulling the sweatpants on over it for warmth and modesty. He averted his eyes the entire time, his movements quick and clinical. He then half-carried, half-dragged her to Zara's room and tucked her into the small twin bed, pulling the unicorn-patterned comforter up to her chin. She looked small and lost in the child's bed, surrounded by stuffed animals and crayon drawings. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, the weight of his decision pressing down on him. He had missed his chance to be at Zara's play. He had a strange, powerful white woman asleep in his daughter's bed. This was a minefield. He went back to the living room and sat down on the edge of the sofa, the spot where she had been. He needed to leave a trail of breadcrumbs, a record of his intentions. He found a notepad and a pen from the junk drawer. His handwriting was neat, careful. "Ms. Vance," he wrote, "my name is Marcus Cole. I work on the night crew at your building. You fell in the lobby and twisted your ankle. You were unable to give me an address and I could not leave you there. I brought you to my apartment to make sure you were safe. Your ankle is iced. I slept on the floor in the living room. Your purse and phone are on the coffee table. I hope you are feeling better. Please let me know if I can call anyone for you when you wake up." He read it over 3 times. It sounded sterile, formal. It didn't capture the complexity of the situation, the fear churning in his gut. But it was the truth. He placed the note on the coffee table, right next to her designer purse, where she couldn't miss it. He then took a spare blanket and a pillow from the hall closet and made a bed for himself on the floor, right in front of the door to Zara's room. He was a sentry, a protector, but he wasn't sure if he was protecting her from the world or himself from her. He lay down, the floor hard against his back, and stared up at the dark ceiling. Sleep, a distant country he could not reach. He just prayed that the woman in the next room was a person of character, a person who would understand. Because if she wasn't, his life as he knew it was over. The first slivers of dawn crept through the blinds, painting grey stripes across the living room. Marcus hadn't slept. He had dozed fitfully, his mind a whirlwind of worst-case scenarios. Every creak of the building, every distant siren, had him sitting bolt upright. He had replayed the night over and over, questioning every decision. Should he have just called 911? They might have taken her to a public hospital. A media circus could have ensued. A CEO found intoxicated and injured. It would have been a nightmare for her. Should he have just left her there for the morning crew to find? The thought made him sick. It wasn't in his nature. Angela had always said he had a savior complex, a gentle ribbing for his inability to walk away from anyone in trouble. "It's your greatest strength and your biggest weakness, baby," she used to say, kissing his cheek. Tonight, it felt like a catastrophic flaw. He heard a rustle from Zara's room, a soft groan. He sat up, his body stiff from the floor, his heart starting to pound a frantic rhythm against his ribs. This was it, the moment of truth. He stood up, smoothed down his work clothes, and stood by the kitchen doorway, wanting to give her space, but also needing to be visible, to control the narrative from the very beginning. Elizabeth Vance emerged from the bedroom, blinking against the morning light. She was leaning against the doorframe, one hand pressed to her temple. She looked down at herself, a flicker of confusion crossing her face as she took in the soft grey t-shirt and the baggy sweatpants. Her eyes darted around the apartment, taking in the unfamiliar surroundings. The child's drawings, the worn furniture, the wedding photo on the mantel. He saw the confusion morph into alarm and then into pure, undiluted fear. Her gaze landed on him. He held his hands up slightly, a gesture of peace. "Good morning, Ms. Vance. My name is Marcus Cole. Before he could finish, her eyes locked on her purse and phone on the coffee table. She limped towards them, snatching the phone up. She didn't see the note. Her back was to him, her shoulders tense. She stabbed at the screen with a trembling finger. He could hear the frantic beeps as she dialed. He stood perfectly still, his back against the wall. He knew how this would play out. A black man, his drunk, wealthy white boss, in his small Brooklyn apartment. She was wearing clothes that weren't hers. It didn't matter what actually happened. It didn't matter that he had slept on the floor. It didn't matter that he had treated her with nothing but respect. The optics were a death sentence. Her voice came through the phone, a raw, terrified whisper. "Claire, it's me. Listen to me." A pause. "I don't know. I woke up in someone's house. A man's house." Marcus felt the air leave his lungs. The floor seemed to drop out from under him. He closed his eyes. He thought of Zara. He thought of her bright, innocent face, her unwavering faith in him. What would happen to her if he were arrested? Who would take care of her? The carefully built walls of his life were crumbling, turning to dust. "I'm wearing clothes that aren't mine," Elizabeth continued, her voice gaining a hysterical edge. "I don't remember anything after the gala. Oh God, Claire, I don't remember anything." Marcus leaned his head back against the cool plaster of the wall. This was the abyss, the thing he had spent his entire adult life trying to avoid, the misunderstanding from which there was no recovery. He could already see the headlines, the mugshot, the way his life would be dissected and twisted into a narrative that fit a pre-written script. The helpful janitor becomes the predator. The devoted father becomes the monster. He had done the right thing, the human thing, and it was about to cost him everything. He didn't say a word. He just stood there, waiting for the inevitable, a ghost in his own home. "He's here," Elizabeth whispered into the phone, her eyes wide with fear as she looked at him. "He's right here." On the other end of the line, Marcus could almost hear the sharp intake of breath from the woman named Claire. He could imagine the instructions being given. "Don't hang up. Tell me the address. I'm calling the police right now." He braced himself for the sirens. He braced himself for the knock on the door, the one that would change his life forever. His entire body felt like it was encased in ice. He was no longer Marcus Cole, father to Zara, widower of Angela. He was a suspect, a statistic waiting to happen. He watched as Elizabeth's gaze flickered from him to the coffee table again. This time, she saw it. The single sheet of notepad paper lying next to her purse. Her eyes narrowed slightly. She kept the phone pressed to her ear, but her attention was now fixed on the note. She limped the final step and picked it up with a trembling hand. Marcus held his breath. He watched her read it, her eyes scanning the neat block letters. He saw a subtle shift in her expression. The raw terror began to recede, replaced by a flicker of confusion. Then something else. He saw her eyes dart down to her own foot, propped on the chair where she'd left it, the now soggy bag of peas still resting near it. She looked back at him, and for the first time, she wasn't looking at a threat. She was seeing a person. A tired, worried-looking man in a janitor's uniform, standing rigidly against his own kitchen wall. "Claire, wait," she said into the phone, her voice suddenly different, quieter, less hysterical. "Wait, don't call anyone just yet." A sliver of hope, fragile as a spider's thread, entered Marcus's heart. He remained silent, letting the note do its work. "There's a note here," she said, her voice dropping even lower. She read it aloud, her words slow and deliberate. "My name is Marcus Cole. I work on the night crew. You fell. I could not leave you there. I brought you to my apartment to make sure you were safe." She trailed off, then looked around the room again, her gaze lingering on the blanket and pillow neatly folded on the floor in front of the bedroom door she had just exited, the door to his daughter's room. "I slept on the floor in the living room." She repeated his words, but this time they were a statement of fact, not a question. She lowered the phone slightly from her ear, her knuckles white. "Claire, I think I've made a terrible mistake." Marcus finally allowed himself to breathe, a long, shuddering exhale he hadn't realized he was holding. The immediate danger, the flashing lights and handcuffs, seemed to be receding, but the damage was done. The accusation, even unspoken, hung in the air between them, thick and poisonous. Elizabeth sank onto the sofa, the phone still in her hand. He's just standing there. He hasn't moved. He looks terrified." She was talking to Claire, but it was as if she were talking to herself, piecing together the narrative, replacing the one born of fear with the one supported by evidence. The respectful distance, the care for her ankle, the clothes, a woman's t-shirt, not a man's, the note, the makeshift bed on the floor. It was a mosaic of decency, of profound and risky kindness. She finally looked up at him, her eyes filled with a dawning horror, not for her situation, but for what she had almost done to him. "Mr. Cole." Her voice was barely a whisper. He just nodded, unable to find his own voice. The front door of the apartment opened, and a little girl with 2 bright pink ribbons in her hair bounced in, followed by a kindly-looking elderly woman. "Daddy, I'm home. Mrs. Patterson said you had a work emergency. Did you fix the whole building?" It was Zara. The sight of his daughter, so full of innocent morning energy, broke the spell. Zara stopped short when she saw the strange woman on her couch. She tilted her head, her big brown eyes taking in the scene with a child's unfiltered curiosity. Mrs. Patterson froze in the doorway, her hand flying to her mouth as she saw Elizabeth Vance. Zara looked from the pale, disheveled woman on the couch to her father, who still looked like a statue carved from fear. She walked right past Elizabeth, went straight to Marcus, and wrapped her small arms around his legs. "You look sad, Daddy," she said, her voice muffled against his trousers. "Did the work emergency make you sad?" The simple, profound truth of her words cracked something open inside his chest. He reached down and put a hand on her head, the familiar feel of her hair grounding him. Elizabeth Vance watched the scene, her face crumbling. She saw the fierce, protective love in the way he touched his daughter. She saw the innocent trust in the girl's eyes. And she understood. She understood the magnitude of the risk he had taken. She understood the terror she had inflicted upon him. She lifted the phone back to her ear. "Claire," she said, her voice clear now, and laced with steel. "I need you to listen to me very carefully." Nothing happened. "This man, Marcus Cole, he helped me, he saved me, and I almost just destroyed his life. I need you to make sure this goes no further. Do you understand me? This call, this conversation, it never happened." She hung up the phone and placed it gently on the coffee table. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the distant sound of city traffic. Mrs. Patterson quietly guided Zara toward the kitchen, whispering about getting some juice. Elizabeth looked at Marcus. The powerful CEO was gone. In her place was just a woman, ashamed and humbled. "Mr. Cole," she began, her voice thick with emotion. There are no words. "I am so sorry." Marcus finally found his voice. It was hoarse, rough. "I miss my daughter's play," he said. It was all he could think of. The sacrifice, the broken promise. It was the only price he could put a name to, the only loss he could articulate in that moment. The potential loss of his freedom, his reputation, his daughter, that was too vast, too terrifying to even contemplate. But the play, that was real. That was a moment with his child he could never get back. And it was the price he had paid for her safety. Tears welled in Elizabeth's eyes and spilled down her cheeks. You missed your daughter's play. For me. He just nodded again, the simple gesture carrying the weight of the entire night. The weight of his world. Mrs. Patterson returned from the kitchen, a woman who understood boundaries and the art of gentle intervention. She didn't look at Elizabeth. She looked at Marcus, her expression full of warmth and pride. Don't you worry about that play, Marcus, she said softly, pulling her old oversized phone from her purse. I recorded the whole thing, every second of it. She was the best North Star I have ever seen. She held the phone out to him. A lifeline. The tension in the room finally broke, replaced by something new, something fragile and raw. It was the beginning of an understanding, born not in a boardroom, but in a small Brooklyn apartment, witnessed by a little girl in pink ribbons and an old woman with a heart full of grace. Before we continue with Marcus's story, let us know where you're watching from in the comments. We love seeing how far these stories travel. And if you believe in the power of character and integrity, don't forget to subscribe for more content that inspires. Marcus took the phone from Mrs. Patterson's hand. His own fingers were trembling slightly. He looked at the screen, at the small thumbnail of a video, a brightly lit school stage. He couldn't bring himself to press play. Not yet. The relief that was supposed to be flooding him felt distant, blocked by a dam of residual fear and a profound, bone-deep weariness. He had walked to the edge of the cliff, looked into the abyss, and somehow, inexplicably, been pulled back. But the memory of the fall, the feeling of weightlessness, still lingered. Elizabeth sat on the couch watching him. She seemed to shrink into herself, the shame a visible cloak around her shoulders. She was no longer the imperious CEO, the woman whose name was etched in granite on a skyscraper. She was a guest in his home, a home she had nearly turned into a crime scene. She looked at the crayon drawings on the wall, at the worn but loved stuffed animals peeking out of Zara's room. She saw the evidence of a life filled with care and attention, a life of modest means but abundant love, a life she had almost shattered with a single, panicked phone call. I'll call a car, she said, her voice small. She reached for her phone, but her movements were hesitant, as if she were afraid to assert any kind of authority in this space she had so thoroughly violated. Marcus finally looked at her. Really looked at her. He saw the genuine remorse in her eyes, the self-recrimination, and beneath that, he saw the same desolation he had glimpsed last night, in the lobby. The source of her recklessness. He thought of Angela, who had always preached empathy, even for those who seemed to have everything. Everyone's fighting a battle you know nothing about, she would say. Be kind, always. Your ankle, he said, his voice flat but not unkind. You shouldn't put weight on it. He gestured to the now melted bag of peas. It needs to be elevated, and probably looked at by a doctor. His practicality seemed to disarm her further. She had been prepared for anger, for accusations, for a demand for compensation. She was not prepared for continued concern. She was a woman who dealt in transactions, in leverage and liability. This quiet, unearned grace was a foreign language. She started, then stopped. Thank you. Zara came trotting back into the room, holding a juice box in one hand and a piece of paper in the other. She stopped in front of Elizabeth. Are you the work emergency? She asked, her head tilted. Elizabeth looked startled, then managed a small, watery smile. Yes, I suppose I am. My daddy fixes everything, Zara said with absolute certainty. She then held out the piece of paper. It was a drawing, done in her signature chaotic style. A big smiling sun, a lopsided house, and two stick figures. One was tall, labeled Daddy. The other was a smaller figure with a bright yellow triangle on its chest, labeled Me, the North Star. And standing next to them, Zara had just added a new figure in shaky purple crayon. A woman with messy yellow hair. "That's you," Zara said, pointing with a sticky finger. "You look sad, like the kind where you smile but your eyes don't. So I drew you with us, so you wouldn't be lonely." Out of the mouths of babes. Marcus felt that crack in his chest widen. He watched as Elizabeth took the drawing from Zara's hand. She stared at it, at the simple, profound kindness of a child who saw not a CEO or a threat, but a sad person who needed a friend. The carefully constructed dam of Elizabeth's composure broke completely. She bowed her head, and a quiet, wrenching sob escaped her. It was not the hysterical sound from earlier, but a sound of deep, cathartic grief. Zara, who had never been taught to fear tears, reached out a small hand and patted Elizabeth's knee. "It's okay," she said softly. "Everybody gets sad sometimes. My mummy used to say that tears are just the rain that makes the flowers grow in your heart." Marcus had to turn away. He walked to the window and looked out at the familiar Brooklyn street, his vision blurring. He heard Angela's voice in Zara's words, a legacy of kindness passed down, a light that could not be extinguished. He had been so focused on the injustice, on the danger, that he hadn't seen the other thing that was happening in the room. A moment of unexpected, radical grace. After a few moments, Elizabeth's sobbing subsided. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, looking like a different person entirely. The polished veneer was gone, stripped away to reveal something raw and real. She looked at Zara with a reverence that bordered on awe. "Thank you," she whispered to the little girl. "Your mommy was very wise." She then looked at Marcus, who had turned back from the window. "Mr. Cole, Marcus, there is nothing I can do to repay you for what you did last night, or for what you've endured this morning." "There's nothing to repay," he said, and he was surprised to find that he meant it. The anger and fear were beginning to dissolve, replaced by a weary sort of peace. "You were in trouble, I helped, that's all." "No, that is not all," she insisted, her voice gaining a sliver of its old authority, but tempered now with humility. "I put you in an impossible, dangerous position. The fact that you are not angry, that you are still showing me kindness, it's—" She shook her head, unable to find the right word. "I have spent my entire life surrounded by people who calculate every move, every favor. I've never encountered this." He thought about that, about the world she lived in, the one he cleaned, a world of glass and steel and transactional relationships. Maybe in that world, what he did was a foreign concept. In his world, the world of Mrs. Patterson and the memory of Angela, it was just called being a neighbor. "Maybe you've just been around the wrong people," he said simply. The statement, so devoid of judgment, landed with the force of a thunderclap. Elizabeth stared at him, a new understanding dawning in her eyes. She had built an empire, but she had failed to build a community. She had assets and employees, but no neighbors. An hour later, a discreet black car was waiting downstairs. Marcus had insisted on helping Elizabeth down the stairs, despite her protests. He was not going to have her fall again on his watch. The journey down the 3 flights was slow, but this time it felt different. There was no fear, no sense of illicit activity. There was only a quiet, shared understanding. As he helped her into the back of the car, she turned to him. "I will handle everything at work," she said. "Any questions, any issues. I will make it clear that you acted with my full authority and consent. You will be protected." He nodded. "Thank you." "That's not enough," she said, shaking her head. She looked from him to Zara, who was standing in the doorway, waving. "This isn't something that can be fixed with a memo. Or with money." She paused, searching for the right words. "You showed me a different kind of strength tonight, Marcus. The kind that matters. Presence. Integrity. I won't forget it." She gave him a small, genuine smile, the first one he had seen where her eyes smiled too. The car door closed, and the sleek vehicle pulled away from the curb, a silent black ship sailing away from his world and back to its own. Marcus and Zara stood on the stoop, watching it disappear. He put his arm around his daughter's shoulders, pulling her close. "Is the emergency over, Daddy?" she asked, looking up at him. "Yes, baby," he said, kissing the top of her head. "The emergency is over." He led her back inside, back to the quiet of their apartment. He sat on the couch and finally picked up Mrs. Patterson's phone. He pressed play. The video was a bit shaky, but the sound was clear. The curtain opened on a stage full of children, dressed as planets and stars. And there, in the center, on a yellow box, stood a little girl in a shimmering silver costume, a foil star on a headband. She was perfectly, utterly still, her arm outstretched, pointing the way. She was the North Star, his North Star. And as he watched her, a single tear, one he hadn't realized he was holding back, traced a path down his cheek. It wasn't a tear of fear or of anger. It was a tear of gratitude. He was still here. He was still free. He was still her father. And for today, that was more than enough. The following Monday, Marcus walked into the Vance Tower with a sense of trepidation. The weekend had been a quiet buffer, a time for the adrenaline to recede and for normalcy to seep back in. He and Zara had gone to the park, they'd made pancakes, they'd read books. He had tried to push the events of Friday night into a box and put it on a high shelf. But now, walking through the gleaming lobby he had cleaned just a few nights before, the box tumbled open. Every head that turned in his direction made his stomach clench. He expected to see whispers, strange looks. He expected to be called into the HR office, to be met with the cold, sterile language of termination, dressed up as a mutual separation. He clocked in and went to the basement locker room. His co-workers on the night crew, a small, tight-knit group of men and women from a dozen different countries, greeted him with their usual gruff affection. No one seemed to know anything. The rumor mill, usually ruthlessly efficient, was silent. It seemed Elizabeth Vance had kept her word. The incident was contained. He felt a measure of relief, but the unease lingered. He was a man who lived his life by avoiding notice. Now, he carried a secret that connected him directly to the most powerful person in the building. It felt like walking around with a lit match in his pocket. For the first few hours of his shift, everything was normal. He cleaned the executive washrooms on the 48th floor, emptied the trash cans filled with discarded reports and fancy coffee cups, vacuumed the plush carpets that cost more than his car. He was a ghost again, moving through the empty halls, his presence registered only by the pristine surfaces he left in his wake. He preferred it this way. He found a rhythm in the work, a meditative quality that allowed his mind to quiet down. Around 1 a.m., he was polishing the brass fixtures on the main elevator bank when the private penthouse elevator chimed. The doors slid open. It was her. Elizabeth Vance stood there, dressed not in a power suit, but in simple dark trousers and a soft cashmere sweater. Her hair was down and she wore minimal makeup. Her ankle was wrapped in a discreet medical brace over a flat shoe. She was holding a large flat portfolio. She wasn't looking at her phone or barking orders into a Bluetooth earpiece. She was just standing there, looking at him. "Marcus," she said. Her voice was quiet, without the usual audience of board members and assistants. He straightened up, his polishing cloth still in his hand. "Miss Vance, I was hoping I might see you," she said, taking a small, careful step out of the elevator. "I know this is your workspace, and I don't want to interrupt." "It's no problem," he said, his old habits of deference kicking in. Actually, it is a problem, she countered gently. The fact that I have worked in this building for 15 years, and this is the first real conversation we have ever had. The fact that I didn't even know your name until you wrote it on a piece of paper in your living room. She looked around the cavernous, silent lobby. You take care of this place. You make it beautiful and functional, and I've never once acknowledged you. Marcus didn't know what to say. He had never expected to be acknowledged. That wasn't part of the job description. The job was to be invisible, to reset the stage so that the important people, like her, could play their parts. I've been doing a lot of thinking since Friday, she continued, her gaze unwavering. About the kind of company I run, the kind of person I've become. She looked down at the portfolio in her hands. I cleared my schedule tonight. I sent everyone home. I told my security detail to take the night off. I wanted to talk to you, not as a CEO to a janitor, but as one person to another, if that's all right. He was so taken aback he could only nod. This was uncharted territory. First, she said, her voice formal but sincere, I want to again offer my deepest, most profound apology. What I almost did, the assumption I made, in my panic, it was unforgivable. It was born of a fear that is a luxury, a fear that doesn't have the same consequences for me as it does for you. I see that now, and I am ashamed. I appreciate that, Marcus said, his voice quiet. Second, she said, holding out the portfolio, this is for Zara. Marcus's protective instincts flared. He immediately thought it was money, a check, some kind of payoff. His posture stiffened. We don't need... It's not what you think, she said quickly, seeming to read his mind. Please just open it. Hesitantly, he took the portfolio. It was heavy, made of fine leather. He laid it on a marble bench and unzipped it. Inside, nestled on a bed of black velvet, was not a check, but a framed photograph. It was a stunning, professional-quality astrophotograph of the night sky, a breathtaking swirl of nebulae and distant galaxies. And in the very center, one star shone with a brilliant, unwavering light. Attached to the corner of the frame was a small, engraved brass plaque. It read, For Zara, the North Star, who guides us all when we are lost, with deepest gratitude, Elizabeth. Marcus stared at the photograph, at the plaque. It was the most thoughtful, most personal gift he could have imagined. It wasn't charity. It wasn't a payoff. It was a gesture of true understanding. It honored his daughter. It honored his sacrifice. It acknowledged their story. He ran his thumb over the cool metal of the plaque. I called a friend at NASA, Elizabeth explained softly. I told him I needed a picture of Polaris, the real North Star. He sent me this. I had it framed this weekend. It's beautiful, Marcus said, his voice thick. She will love this. That's not all, Elizabeth said. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, simple envelope. This time, Marcus didn't flinch. This is for you, and before you refuse, please just read it. He took the envelope. Inside was not a check, but a single sheet of heavy cardstock. It was a formal letter, on Vance Corp letterhead. It was an official commendation. It described, in vague but glowing terms, an incident in which an employee, Marcus Cole, had gone above and beyond the call of duty, demonstrating extraordinary integrity, compassion, and sound judgment in a crisis situation. It mentioned his unwavering commitment to the safety and well-being of a fellow colleague. It was signed by her, Elizabeth Vance, CEO. It's for your file, she said. But it's also for you. It's a document. It's a record. If anyone ever, for any reason, questions your character, you have this. It's not much against the way the world works, but it's something. It's the truth, on the record. He read the letter again. It was a shield, a piece of paper armor. In a world where his character could be shredded by a single misunderstanding, she had given him an official, corporate testament to his honor. It was a deeply practical, deeply insightful gift. It showed that she hadn't just felt sorry. She had understood the specific nature of his vulnerability. She had understood his core fear. "Thank you," he said, and this time the words were full and clear. This means a lot." They stood in silence for a moment, the hum of the building around them. The gulf between the CEO and the janitor had vanished. They were just two people, standing in a lobby, who had been through an ordeal together and had come out the other side changed. "I watched the video," she said suddenly. "The one your neighbor took." Marcus looked up, surprised. "You did?" "Mrs. Patterson is a very persuasive woman," Elizabeth said with a small smile. "She came up to my office this afternoon, marched right past my executive assistant, said she had something the CEO needed to see. She told me she wanted me to understand exactly what you gave up." Elizabeth's smile faded. "I watched your daughter, standing so still, so proud, and I saw the empty seat in the front row, the one that was meant for you." The guilt, which had been lurking just below the surface, surged up in Marcus again. "I'm not telling you this to make you feel guilty," Elizabeth said quickly, seeing the look on his face. "I'm telling you because I need you to know that I see it. I see the sacrifice, and it's not something I will ever take lightly." She took a deep breath. "My ex-husband, Richard, the reason I was in that state, he used to say I only understood value, not worth, that I only saw things in terms of profit and loss." She looked at the empty seat in her memory. "You missed a moment with your daughter that was priceless, and you did it for me. I don't know how to balance that ledger. I don't think it's possible." "It's not a ledger," Marcus said. "It was a choice, a hard one. But I think I'd make it again. Angela, my wife, she would have wanted me to." He glanced at the wedding photo he kept in his wallet, the one he sometimes looked at on his breaks. She wouldn't have been able to walk away. Neither could I. He had spoken of Angela to her. The name, the memory, hung in the air between them, a sacred thing. He had let her into his life, not just his apartment, but his history, his heart. Elizabeth nodded slowly, accepting the significance of the offering. "Well," she said, her voice soft, "Angela was a very good woman." A comfortable quiet settled between them again. This was the new understanding. A space where a CEO could talk about her divorce, and a janitor could talk about his late wife. And it wasn't strange. It was just human. "There's a spring concert at Zara's school in 2 months," Marcus found himself saying, the words surprising him as much as they likely surprised her. "She's singing a solo this time. It's a Saturday afternoon." Elizabeth's face lit up with a genuine, unforced smile. "I would be honored to be there, if you'll have me." "We'll save you a seat," he said. "Front row." She nodded, her eyes shining. "Thank you, Marcus." She turned and walked back to the private elevator. Just before the doors closed, she looked back at him. "Good night, Marcus. Thank you for taking care of my building." The doors slid shut, and he was alone again in the silent lobby. But something was different. He was no longer a ghost. He had been seen. He picked up his polishing cloth, but he didn't immediately go back to work. He just stood there, in the middle of the gleaming black marble, holding the letter of commendation in one hand and the portfolio with the picture of the North Star in the other. He felt the weight of them, not as a burden, but as an anchor. The world hadn't changed. The dangers were still there, but he felt a little less invisible, a little less afraid, and for the first time in a long time, he felt a flicker of something that felt remarkably like hope. The 2 months leading up to the spring concert passed in a blur of routine, but with a subtle, underlying shift. At work, nothing overtly changed. Marcus was still part of the night crew. He still pushed his cart through the silent hallways, but he felt different. He walked with his head held a little higher. The letter of commendation was tucked away safely at home, but its effect was imprinted on his spirit. He no longer felt like he was perpetually on the verge of being misunderstood. He had an ally in the highest office in the building, a person who had seen his character and vouched for it. It was a quiet confidence that radiated from him. His interactions with Elizabeth Vance were few and far between, but meaningful. Occasionally, she would be working late, and their paths would cross. She would stop, not just with a polite nod, but with a genuine question. "How's Zara's solo coming along?" Or, "Did you see the meteor shower last night?" They were small moments of connection that breached the chasm between their worlds. She never tried to offer him money or a promotion he hadn't earned. She seemed to understand that what he valued most was respect, not charity. She gave him that in spades. She learned the names of the other members of his crew, greeting them with a warmth that initially startled them, but eventually earned their trust. The culture of the building began to shift. From the bottom up and the top down, the invisible people started to feel a little more seen. At home, the framed photograph of the North Star held a place of honor on Zara's bedroom wall, right next to her own drawing. She was mesmerized by it. "Is that my star, Daddy?" she had asked, her eyes wide with wonder. "That's the real one," he had told her. "The one you were pretending to be. It's been guiding people for a very, very long time." The incident had also changed Elizabeth in ways that rippled out into her professional life. Marcus heard whispers from the day shift workers. The notoriously ruthless CEO had become different, more collaborative, more empathetic. She had scrapped a plan for massive layoffs at one of their subsidiary companies, opting instead for a more creative, humane solution that involved retraining and restructuring. She started a new corporate philanthropy program, one that didn't just involve writing checks, but encouraged employees to donate their time, to be present in their communities. Richard, her ex-husband, had accused her of only understanding value, not worth. It seemed she was finally learning the difference. One evening, about a week before the concert, Marcus found her in the deserted 50th floor boardroom, staring out at the glittering cityscape. She didn't seem surprised to see him. "It's a beautiful view," he said, as he began to empty the trash can. "I used to think so," she replied, not turning around. "I used to see it as a kingdom, all the lights, all the buildings. It felt like a testament to power, to winning." She paused. "Now, I just see millions of little windows, millions of little lives, people loving each other, fighting, raising their kids, missing the people they've lost." She finally turned to face him. "You changed my perspective, Marcus. That night, you didn't just save me from a dangerous situation. You saved me from this." She gestured to the cold, impersonal boardroom. "From a life lived behind glass. You saved yourself, Ms. Vance," he said. "You could have made that phone call. You could have chosen the easy story, the one everyone would have believed, but you didn't. You chose the truth." She considered that for a moment. "My friend Claire, the lawyer I called, she told me I was a fool not to press charges. She said it was a massive liability. She said, what if he had been a different kind of man?" Elizabeth's eyes met his. "I told her, but he wasn't. That's the point. The world wants us to live in fear of the what if. But sometimes we have to have faith in the what is." The day of the spring concert arrived, a perfect, sunny Saturday. Zara was a bundle of nervous energy, practicing her song. A simple, sweet melody about a little bird learning to fly, over and over again. Marcus helped her get into her dress, a simple white frock that made her look like a little angel. As he combed her hair, he caught his own reflection in the mirror. He looked less tired than he had in years. The cautious, haunted look in his eyes had been replaced by a quiet calm. They arrived at the school auditorium and found their seats. Marcus had saved too, as promised. He felt a little self-conscious. What if she didn't show? What if it had just been a polite gesture? He didn't want Zara to be disappointed. Just as the lights were about to dim, a figure slipped into the seat next to him. It was Elizabeth. She was dressed down in jeans and a simple blouse, her hair in a ponytail. She held a small bouquet of wildflowers. She looked like just another parent from the neighborhood. "I'm sorry I'm late," she whispered, her face flushed from rushing. The traffic was unbelievable. "You made it," Marcus said, a wide, genuine smile spreading across his face. "That's what matters." Zara, who was sitting on his other side, peeked around him and her face lit up. "You came." "Of course I came," Elizabeth said, handing her the bouquet. "I wouldn't miss the little bird's first flight for the world." The concert began. There were clumsy recorder ensembles, off-key choir numbers, and adorable dance routines. It was the beautiful, chaotic symphony of a public school arts program. Marcus and Elizabeth sat side by side, sharing quiet laughs and appreciative applause. There was no awkwardness. It felt natural, right? They were two people brought together by a crisis who had chosen to build a bridge of friendship across the chasm of their differences. Finally, it was Zara's turn. Ms. Albright, her music teacher, announced her name. Zara walked to the center of the stage, her little hands clasped in front of her. She looked out at the audience, her eyes searching. She found Marcus, and he gave her a thumbs up. Then her eyes found Elizabeth, who smiled and gave a little wave. Zara beamed. She took a deep breath, and the first clear, sweet notes of her song filled the auditorium. She sang with a purity and confidence that stunned the crowd into silence. Her voice was a beacon of innocence and hope. Marcus felt a familiar prickling in his eyes. He thought of Angela, who had loved to sing. He felt her presence in that moment, not as a sad memory, but as a joyful continuation. He knew she would be so proud. He glanced at Elizabeth. Tears were streaming freely down her face, but she was smiling, a radiant, unashamed smile of pure joy. She wasn't crying for her own loss or shame. She was crying because something was beautiful. When the last note faded, the auditorium was silent for a beat, and then it erupted in thunderous applause. Zara took a bow, her face glowing with pride, and ran off the stage. After the concert, they found her backstage, surrounded by teachers and other parents, all congratulating her. She ran to Marcus and threw her arms around his waist. "Did you see me, Daddy? Was I good?" "You were more than good, baby," he said, hugging her tight. "You were magnificent." She then turned to Elizabeth. "Did you like my song?" Elizabeth knelt down so she was at eye level with Zara. "I loved your song. It was the most beautiful song I have ever heard." She looked from Zara to Marcus. "Thank you both for letting me be here. This was worth more than any boardroom victory." As they were leaving, they passed a group of wealthy-looking parents from a nearby private school who were there to see a nephew in the show. They were dressed in designer clothes, talking loudly in the VIP lounge area the school had set up for donors. One of them, a man with a smug look, gestured dismissively toward Marcus. "Can you believe they let the janitorial staff just mix with everyone?" he said to his friend, just loud enough to be heard. "You'd think they'd have standards." Marcus froze. The old fear, the familiar sting of being categorized and dismissed, shot through him. He instinctively put a protective hand on Zara's shoulder, ready to retreat, to make himself small again. But before he could move, Elizabeth stepped forward. She walked right up to the man, her posture radiating a calm but unshakable authority that Marcus had only ever seen her use in corporate settings. "Excuse me," she said, her voice low but cutting through the chatter. The man looked at her, then did a double take, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. He was a mid-level executive at a rival firm. "Ms. Vance," he stammered, his face paling. I didn't see you there. Clearly, she said, her voice cold as ice. I want to introduce you to someone. This is Marcus Cole, and this is his daughter, Zara. She put a hand on Marcus's arm, a gesture of solidarity that was unmistakable. Mr. Cole is not the staff. He is a man of more integrity, courage, and character than anyone I have ever had the privilege of knowing. He is a hero, and he is my friend. The man's jaw dropped. His friends looked on, mortified. Elizabeth wasn't finished. She leaned in slightly. And if I ever hear you or anyone else speak about him with anything less than the utmost respect, I will personally make it my mission to ensure that every door in this city is closed to you. Am I clear? Yes, Miss Vance, the man squeaked, looking utterly humiliated. Crystal clear. I am so sorry. Elizabeth gave him one last withering look, then turned her back on him. She walked back to Marcus and Zara, her expression softening immediately. I apologize that you had to hear that, she said to Marcus. Marcus looked at her, then at the stunned group of parents, then back at her. For years he had lived his life trying to be invisible, trying to avoid mistakes, trying to never give anyone a reason to question his character. But that night in the lobby, he had made a different choice, a dangerous choice, and somehow, against all odds, it had led him here, to this moment, being defended, being seen, being honored. He wasn't invisible anymore. He was standing in the light, and he wasn't afraid. He looked at Elizabeth, the powerful CEO who had learned the meaning of worth, and at Zara, his own North Star, who had guided them both with her innocent wisdom. Maybe the world wasn't fair. Maybe it never would be. But maybe there were still people who could see him for who he really was. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Thank you, Elizabeth, he said, using her first name for the first time. She just smiled, a real true smile. Anytime, Marcus, anytime. From invisible to unforgettable. Marcus Cole's story proves that doing the right thing matters, even when it costs you everything. His courage wasn't built in the spotlight of a boardroom, but in the quiet, difficult choices he made when he thought no one was watching. If you believe in the power of stories about everyday heroes, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Share this with someone who needs a reminder that integrity and character are the truest measures of a person's worth. And let us know in the comments, what does it mean to you to truly be seen?